Rob Gorski. Rob Gorski, known as the Autism Dad, is a single father to three autistic sons, Elliot, Emmett, and Gavin, in Northeast Ohio. As the founder and CEO of the Autism Dad, Rob has been a prominent voice in the autism community since 2010. Through his widely read blog, podcast, and social media platforms, he shares personal stories, expert interviews, and practical advice, creating a supportive space for parents navigating autism and special needs parenting. Recognized by major media outlets like CNN, ABC News, BBC Worldwide, and The Tamron Hall Show, Rob is dedicated to educating the public about autism, fostering community, and inspiring others through his advocacy. Rob Gorski. Rob Gorski, connu sous le nom de The Autism Dad, est un père célibataire de trois fils autistes, Elliot, Emmett et Gavin, vivant dans le nord-est de l'Ohio. En tant que fondateur et PDG de The Autism Dad, Rob est une voix importante au sein de la communauté autiste depuis 2010. À travers son blog très lu, son podcast et ses plateformes sur les réseaux sociaux, il partage des histoires personnelles, des entrevues d'experts et des conseils pratiques, créant ainsi un espace de soutien pour les parents qui accompagnent leurs enfants sur le spectre de l'autisme et qui vivent la parentalité avec des besoins particuliers. Reconnu par de grands médias tels que Cable News Network, American Broadcasting Company, British Broadcasting Corporation et The Tamron Hall Show, Rob se consacre à sensibiliser le public à l'autisme, à renforcer la communauté et à inspirer d'autres personnes à travers son engagement.
So how do you balance self-care with the demands of parenting in specifically, I suppose?
Well, I haven't quite figured that out, to be honest with you. It's sort of like a work in progress.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd think after 24 years that I would have figured some of this out. And well, in fairness, I think I figured some of it out, but it's tough, because I have three autistic kids, and the demand, they're very unique.
Yes.
Like each of them are different. And
yeah.
I was just talking to my son this morning about this, like, we're equity in this house. It's not equality, because like everybody needs something different to get where they need to go. And that's exhausting.
Yeah,
honestly.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And we have complex health things as well. But to be completely honest with you, I have learned the hard way how important that is, because I have twice now found myself in a really dark place, caregiver burnout related type stuff. And part of it, I think, was caused by like living for 44 years at the time without knowing that I had ADHD, so it was unmanaged.
Yeah.
And that's not good for anybody.
Yes.
But that was taking a toll on me.
Yeah.
And I am a single parent, so I don't have any help from their mom. She's not in the picture. And so it's a lot of responsibility. And so I feel like there's not enough of me to go around anyways. And dividing myself up even further to try and take time for me it feels counterintuitive at times.
Yes.
But what I've learned is I don't ever want to go back to those dark places. And it's vital that I am around as long as I possibly can be in order to be there, especially for my oldest, who's going to need somebody for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And to give my kids the best version of me, I have to put back into me. My therapist had told me at one point, and it really helped me reframe this. He's like, sometimes you have to be selfish before you can be selfless.
Yes.
And, society has it kind of structured where like parents are supposed to just give and give and give and give and give to the kids. Kids come first no matter what.
Yeah.
And that's, maybe there's superhumans out there that can do that, but I'm not one of them.
No.
And we can very quickly run up against our limitations, especially when you have kids that have more needs. And it is not sustainable.
Oh no.
And you can compensate, but you're going to crash at some point, and that crash can be really hard. And so I've started to look at self-care as the kindest thing that I can do for my kids, because it gives them mean, not like this sounds really whatever, but like I'm giving them the gift of my presence, which sounds really, I don't mean it in a way that it sounds.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
because, I'm all they have.
Yeah.
And to be around, to witness everything that they're going to do in their lives and stuff, I have to take care of myself.
Yeah.
I could have thought of a better way to say that because that didn't sound really good, but you understand what I mean. And I
Yeah, for
appreciate that.
It's funny because when you're neurodivergent, you understand things in a context that maybe neurotypical people don't understand, but it's
Yes.
pretty easy to,
Yes.
I understand exactly what you're talking about. So
It's same wavelength,
yes.
right? Like that. I'm so used to having to explain myself.
Yes.
It's that's actually really nice. Thank you for that.
Yes, no problem. So I guess this kind of filters into the last question, but how do you manage your own neurodivergence as a parent when you have 3 other neurodivergent people? So essentially you have 4 neurodivergent types in your house. How do you manage all of those neurodivergent types? Because it gets chaotic.
It is chaos. but like, to be honest, like it's all that I know. Like so like, we tend to kind of hate the word normal, but like, this is my normal.
Yeah.
This is normal for me. Like, I don't know what it's like to not exist in this. So it's sort of hard to explain that. But, I will say that, when I was diagnosed with ADHD, it put a lot of things into perspective for me that maybe well, not maybe, I definitely struggled with before. I didn't understand, especially the ADHD side of things. I didn't realize what I was experiencing was ADHD related stuff. And I have like the inattentive form. It's like my brain is just never shuts off.
Yes.
And my kids, well, my 18-year-old is inattentive. My 16-year-old is like all the impulsive, like all of it just went to him. And so I didn't recognize it,
Yeah.
But getting treated for it and getting on meds and stuff has helped me to better understand what they have been going through. Not that I'm in their shoes, but it just provides some context to things that helps me relate a little more. Now, I will never understand what it's like for them to be autistic, because to my knowledge, I'm not autistic, but I mean, I didn't know I was ADHD, so who knows? So I would never pretend to like walk in their shoes with that, but I've been around them for their whole lives. And so I understand what autism is like, at least from the outside looking in, and how it tends to impact them, so that I can try and be more supportive, whatever. But it can be kind of tough, because a lot of times people have, whether it's stemming things that we have here that are triggering for other people in the house.
Yeah.
and it just becomes like this domino effect. And there's never one thing that can address everybody at one time. And so it's like I have to do what it's like, what it's like? It's like 3 different languages.
Yes.
Is what it's like.
Yeah.
And my youngest, who is very, very logical, he's very black and white. My 18-year-old is very always never. And my youngest is very black and white. So like he's dealing with like frequencies and times of things is his always never. And then what actually happens is the black and white for my youngest. We struggle with, why don't you treat my brother the same way that you treat me? Or why don't you treat me the same way you treat him? Or why are you not addressing him the way that you would? And it's because, like, you know what?
Yeah.
If I worked with you the way that I have to work with him, A, you would be really upset with me.
Yes.
And B, we would get nowhere.
Absolutely.
So just because I'm not, reacting the same way to what he does versus what you do, doesn't mean that I'm not reacting in an appropriate way. But there's, everything has to match and line up and be the same. It's always been that way. And it's tough to kind of navigate that stuff, but I have just sort of, well, honestly, my oldest is 24. I have an 18-year-old and a 16-year-old, and we still haven't worked through all that stuff, honestly. So
well, it's always evolving, right? I don't know that you ever can get that language completely down. And
it's a moving target. Because like sometimes something will work today and I think like, oh, thank God, like, I totally got this.
Yes.
And then I'm like, I got this tool in my toolbox, right? And then like the next day when something comes up and I'm like, I got this.
Yeah.
Right. And then they're like, don't,
Yeah.
don't say that to me. I don't
Yeah.
want anything to do with this. And I'm like, are you
Yes.
kidding me? Like,
Yes.
it took me 17 years to figure
Yeah,
this out,
I know.
and it only works one time.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, do you have I'm trying to figure out, how do you teach your children about the importance of their own self-care, particularly in managing their own sensory needs? Or potentially
I get
respecting the needs of their siblings,
mm,
or you
that part.
for that matter.
That part is tricky.
Yeah.
So we were just in therapy the other day, and I was talking with one of my kids and the therapist, and I'm like, they're kind of at the age where they're butting heads a lot.
Yeah.
And it's just like, not everything is autism related. It's just
Yeah.
sibling stuff too.
Yes.
But part of the problem is that they do the same exact thing to each other.
Mhm.
So, you know, he does something to his brother that upsets his brother, but his brother does the same thing to him and it upsets him. But neither one of
Yes.
them recognize that they're doing it to each other, right?
Yeah.
And if they would just stop, like we
Yeah.
could just break this cycle of chaos.
Yes.
But there is sometimes a lack of awareness
Yeah.
as to like what other people might be going through.
Yeah.
They're very, very sensitive. They're very they care very deeply and very empathetic. So
Yeah.
like the people who out there, you know, believe that autistic people are not empathetic or incapable of
Yeah.
empathy, it is the opposite of that.
Absolutely.
They can
It's
experience it so much that it creates a tremendous amount of anxiety. And that's my 18-year-old.
Yeah.
But it's just constant repetition. I feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over and over again because I am really.
Yeah.
And it's like just trying to point out that guys, like, let's just breathe. And
Yeah.
do you not see that you're
Yeah.
doing the exact same thing that you're complaining about him doing?
Yeah.
But it's okay for you, not okay for him.
Yes.
And I'm like, that's like, we have to just kind of take a step back and look at this. In the moment, they're not always aware, and then sometimes they are because they're still kids, right? And they'll do things.
They like to push buttons.
Yeah, and there's no way to really always tease out what's what, but you know, it is a delicate balance that never seems to actually work.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of triggering, but we also understand too that like sensory wise, especially sensory wise, people are very sensitive to that. So, you know, if there's like I deal with like misophonia, which is like someone's chewing makes me homicidal.
Yes.
And like I never get mad, but like if someone is chewing, I can't cope with that.
No.
And sometimes they'll do it just to mess with me, and other times they just don't realize they're doing it.
Yeah.
And you know, I have to remind them, and then they'll like, oh, I'm sorry, Dad, I forgot, or I didn't realize this. And so like there's sensitivity and awareness to that. Like my 18-year-old does not like his social battery is, he wakes up with like 2 spoons, right? Like, and his social battery depletes very quickly. So we're always aware that maybe he's not going to go with us when we go somewhere, or if we go and he's there, then maybe we have to duck out sooner. So it could be annoying to the people in the house sometimes, but they're always there for each other no matter what. Yeah. And, you know, we always told them, like, you know, brothers are forever, you know, and you don't have to like each other all the time because you're not going to. Yeah. But we do need to be sensitive to what the other one is going through. And sometimes it's hard because what they're experiencing is so overwhelming for them that it's hard for them to be able to deal with that, let alone process what someone else might be going through in the moment too. So it is a lot of talking and repetition. Yeah. And I started out, my beard was like red and I had a whole head of hair. And this is 24 years into the journey. Yeah. And there you go. Yeah.
So we'll talk a little bit about preparing your children for adulthood. How do you balance encouraging the independence with providing the necessary support as your children transition into adulthood?
Oh boy. So here's the thing about that. I have made so many mistakes. over the years. I I spent a long time raising my kids' diagnosis more than raising them as kids, because I was so and they've been through a lot in their lives, right? And traumas and things like that. And so my every instinct that I had was to make sure that life was as easy for them as it possibly could, because everyday life was going to be harder for them. And I wanted to level the playing field. But what I inadvertently did was obliterate any obstacles on the playing field. Never let them fall. I was always there to catch them. I made a lot of excuses for behaviors. I'm like, oh, he's autistic. He didn't, he doesn't have any control over this, or he's impulsive. And so I would just kind of like not pick that battle, or I would address it, but not address it in a way where it really served a purpose. You know what I mean? And what happens is at some point it clicked with me that, oh, like they're still kids. Like, sure, they're autistic, but there's a lot of what they're doing that is just dumb kid stuff. That I need to like make stop. Like, you can't do this stuff, guys. And it was actually parents of neurotypical kids who helped me to realize that. And I used to think like I could never learn anything from them, because it's like, you guys don't know what my life is like. But the reality is our kids are still kids. Like, you have ADHD or autism, but you're still a person. And there's still inherently human behaviors that we have. And those human behaviors sometimes are bad decisions or whatever, and we should be held accountable. And we need to learn that there are consequences for what we think, say, and do. And I didn't do that with my kids until they were much older. And so, you know, the best advice that I have for transitioning kids into adulthood is when they are born, assume that that kid is going to grow up to be an adult, and assume that someday they're going to have to exist on this planet without you there. And use every moment that you can, every opportunity to help prepare them for that. Because whether, and this is true whether they have a diagnosis or not, it's even more so if they have a diagnosis. And I don't mean like rob them of childhood or rush them to grow up, but like allow them to fall so they can pick themselves back up. Allow them to make mistakes so that they can learn from them. And you're there to guide them through that so that they learn how to do this stuff. Give them, test some of the bounds of autonomy or independence for them, and like my oldest, especially, he was diagnosed with childhood disintegrative disorder. So he developed, typically it was actually advanced, hit all his milestones early. And then around 4.5, it was like we put in bed, one kid, he woke up, just total global regression. And so it's been a ebb and flow of like lots of stuff for 20 years. And between that and like his complicated health and fragile health stuff, like it was like I was way overprotective. It wasn't until COVID hit here in the States, and he's immunocompromised, and so we had to lock down in our house for 15 months. There was no contact with anybody from the outside. It was just me and my 3 kids, and then maybe some video calls like this. And we had lots of time. And what I learned was, I started kind of stepping back a little bit, and it's like, okay, we've got all day of nothing to do. Why don't we learn how to make mac and cheese, or, learn how to bake, or let's practice doing some of this stuff, because it just started to make sense to me. And it should have made sense a lot earlier, but that's just, you get caught up in everything, and you're one person and whatever. But what I found was like, when I allowed him specifically to do these things, it's like he could actually do that. I mean, it's not perfect, and we got to like remember, turn the stove off when you're done. Make sure there's nothing on the stove when you light the burner, or make sure the oven's empty before you turn it on. There's things like that have to remind him about. But he went from being mostly dependent on me for everything, set up to where I thought he was going to be living on his own, or I'm sorry, with me for the rest of my life, and I'd have to worry about plans afterwards, to he moved out 3 months ago. He's had a job now for over a year. He's got friends. He's navigating his own life. He's performing his own medical procedures that he has to do for his like treatments and stuff. And he's living with friends. And the more that I stepped back, the more that it allowed him to step up. It's really hard to do that. Especially when you haven't for so long. But I think the earlier that we do that, and you can do it little by little by little, And it's not like that baptism by fire thing. Like we kind of had to do it the last minute. So, you know, I learned that lesson. And so I started earlier with my other two, you know, and you guys want to walk to the store. I'm super uncomfortable with it, but you know what? You're very capable of walking to the store. Staying home by themselves, things like that I would never have done before because I just was always too worried about everything. They're very independent now. And my two youngest will need, I mean, they're not going to need any accommodations or anything. Well, maybe some accommodations, but nothing significant. I mean, they'll get an apartment or do whatever they're going to do. And the earlier that I help them start planning for that, the easier and smoother that transition is going to be. So just assume you're watching your kids, the moment they're born, assume that they're going to become an adult, right? Human kids become human adults, and use all that time you have little by little to help them prepare, you know? And just because your kid has a diagnosis doesn't mean that they're not accountable for the things that they do, you know, because society's not going to care. And you're not always going to be there to explain away behavior. So we have to protect them. And help them to not change who they are, but just learn how to interact with the world in a way that keeps them safe.
Adapt to the world as they are. Definitely. So I'm not sure how much more time we have here, but I will ask one more question. What does building your village mean to you, and how do you go about creating a support system for your family?
Ooh, that's a good question. So, well, building your village, I think, can be different for everybody, right? Because the people in your village can be different from person to person, family to family. But for me, when I first started out, when my oldest was diagnosed, there wasn't a lot of discussion about things like autism. And we just didn't talk about it. So the idea of like support groups or like connecting with people who understood just didn't exist. And so, you know, my village consisted of speech therapists, occupational therapists, you know, neurodevelopmental psychologists, like all of these medical things, and like my family and things like that. But I ended up not having the ability to build a network of like friends or connecting with people at the time because it didn't exist. And so I built my own. And I decided that I would try and create what I needed back then for the people who were coming behind me. And that became a huge part of my village. Like unknowingly, I didn't realize that it would turn into that, but it has become a huge part of my village. And so like my village now can span over the globe, and people from all different cultures and experiences, all raising kids with, you know, disabilities, and being able to relate on a very fundamental level, which is, I think, what a lot of people need. Because like we don't necessarily need people to tell us what to do.
No,
we need people to listen without judgment. And to be able to just say, we just had a colossal meltdown for the last 3 hours, and like I'm done. And they're like, I get it, you know, and you don't have to explain it or justify it, like, because there is such power and comfort in that, and in validation. And I think it's so important to help with even the emotional load that we can experience as parents, to have people who can relate. And even if they can't relate, like specifically, they're willing to learn, they're willing to listen without trying to fix everything, because there's nothing that needs fixed, but we have to be able to process things and do so in a way that allows us to keep moving forward without being bogged down by everything. Because I envisioned it like, like the sandpiper, those birds that run along the like the seashore, right? I don't know if it's like in Africa or something where the salt content's really high. So like sometimes they like get these like balls of like salt around their legs that prevent them eventually from flying and swimming and being able to feed themselves and whatever, and then end up dying. And I kind of felt like that's what was happening to me. And, you know, being able to write and to help other people allowed me to process my life in a way that stuff didn't collect and weigh me down. And that became part of my village. You know, people I don't even know that I've never met in real life have been a huge part of my village. But I think it just comes down to connecting with people who get it, who support you, who don't judge, who accept who get on board. They don't have to understand why it needs to be done this way. And they might ask you questions, but not to question you, just so that they better understand.
Yeah.
Those are the people that you need to surround yourself with, because
Yeah.
life is hard enough. And I get questions from parents all the time. Like, I don't have, this person's not on board. They're constantly questioning, they're constantly judging, they're constantly this, that. And you only have so much bandwidth a day, right? So surround yourself with the people who are going to support you, whether they agree with you or not, are willing to learn. And there's nothing wrong with like speaking up if they are concerned about something, but doing so in a way that, like, not in front of the kids, kind of thing, you know, like my parents would question me sometimes because they just wanted to understand, but they would never do it in the moment. They would always pull me aside afterwards and like, help us understand this.
Yeah.
You know, and that to me is so important, because it shows me that I have people in my corner who want to learn and want to support me. And if they don't agree with something in a moment, or they don't understand, they're still going to support me in the moment, and then they'll want to learn more afterwards. So surround yourself with people that are going to help build you up, not tear you down.
Yeah, for sure. And there's something so powerful about that connection with other people. And
Yeah.
I think that's something really positive that's come out of this digital age that we have, that we can make those connections with people all over the world. That,
because it's hard in real life.
it's really hard, especially when you do have neurodivergent children, because sometimes you are trapped. You're trapped in your house, you're trapped in your you know, kids' routines, and you just can't get out of that headspace to be able to make those connections. And being able to do it in the virtual space is a lot more powerful.
And even having a conversation with another neurodivergent person, which I mean, I had, and I'm sure I've talked to a lot of neurodivergent people who just didn't know they were neurodivergent, right?
Yeah.
But there's something different about having this conversation with you versus having this conversation with somebody who is just reading questions.
Yes.
And not have that lived experience where they're like, oh, I know what that was like. Oh, I could totally relate to that.
Yeah.
You know, there's something really powerful in that. And it just helps us to feel more connected and less alone.
Yes.
And that's really important.
Oh, yeah, for sure. That was great. Thank you so much, Rob, for talking with us and for sharing your story. It is really, really great to talk to someone, fellow parent who is neurodivergent, dealing with the same issues that I'm sure a lot of our community are also kind of fielding. We do have a lot more questions here. So what I will do is I will put, maybe we'll put the questions in the chat, or if you want to answer some of the questions later, we can put that to you, and we can send out the questions after the conference, so that we kind of have a little bit more input for our parents in our audience.
Cool.
All right.
Yeah, well, thank you. This was a great conversation. The time flew by. I don't even realize. And I think this is a really important conversation, and I think people are going to benefit from it. So thank you for allowing me to be here.
Thank you very much.